The Amazing Digital Circus is over. It's done. No more Digital Circus.
That's all, freaks!
Thank God, because although I absolutely love the show, I'd rather be skinned alive than be subjected to any more of what became of the online discourse surrounding the show. The fandom frankly became pretty psychotic as the show neared its end. Rabid, insatiable. New heights of media literacy were reached. Oh, the things I saw. The horrible, terrible, no good, very bad takes. Well, fear not, because I, the most reputable enjoyer of the Amazing Digital Circus, am here once again to ride on the coattails of my previous videos performing really well once more.
Alright, let's do this one last time.
So, the Amazing Digital Circus, the last act. Episode 9, the finale. What a finale it was. Did I cry? Yes, of course I cried. That shit was tear-jerking emotional manipulation, at least on par with the torture baby raccoon's first words being And so, since it worked so well for me, I want to explain why and hopefully set the record straight for some people who, willfully or not, seem to have missed the point of the Amazing Digital Circus. Now, first of all, I'll throw the haters a bone. I personally thought Jax's rendition of running the show wasn't quite as good as Kane's, and the theorists sure were right about Jax throwing Kinger into the void, as alluded to by the intermission time segment. My bad on that front. In all seriousness, the Amazing Digital Circus finale was beautiful, and I have so much to say about it. Before we get into it, I want to clarify I'll be referring to Jax with she/her pronouns in this video for reasons that should be clear to you if you've seen the finale, or just the show for that matter, but if not, it's something I thoroughly explained in my previous video and will be touching on again later in this one. I mentioned in a previous video how a lot of the audience seemed to have a warped idea of what the show is, and similarly bizarre expectations for what it was going to do, where its priorities lied. It seems they were expecting a much more arcane and elaborate story, if you can even call it that, because they were expecting the show to be about the stupid mysteries regarding CNA and how the characters got trapped in the circus, which is largely why a lot of people were disappointed with the finale, because it doesn't care about any of that. I can only speculate that they got this idea because of the aesthetic, with making usually childish, innocent things out to be fucked up and spooky, the whole film theory of it all, and the fact it was released on YouTube. A large part of the audience attached itself to the show as if it were Poppy Playtime or Five Nights at Freddy's, which are franchises with basically no actual definitive written story, just mysterious imagery that their respective fandoms have pieced together into, frankly, nigh incoherent lore. More like ARGs rather than stories, really. But, on the contrary, Digital Circus was always a very straightforward story. All the plot holes people will complain about are just missing the forest for the trees. Oh, we don't know how they put on the headsets to get their brains scanned. What happens if the power goes out one day? Why don't they care that much that they're clones? Why was Jax afraid of corn? Why don't we know Scratch's credit card number? None of these questions matter. And this isn't even what plot holes are, it's just people misusing an overused term after Cinema Sins days and thinking anything left unexplained is an issue instead of world-building fluff unnecessary to the story. Again, probably because this is the sort of lore that those ARG-esque specimens concern themselves with. These questions don't matter because the circus is just representative of a version of life which is no lesser than what we see as the socially expected normative life.
It always was real. Everything we felt, everything we've done, everything we are. It'll never leave us.
The circus represents going through the motions in life, not achieving anything but finding meaning in it nonetheless. It doesn't make it any lesser. It is a very marginalized view of finding value in life, since most marginalized people have to find purpose in life outside of the normative expectations of society and the roles they're ascribed as they grow up. What does it change if they're AI mind clones? Why does it matter that they didn't choose this stagnant life? Nobody chooses to lead a stagnant life, you just make do with what you're given. You'd expect people to understand that after episode 2 with Gummy Goo, finding purpose in his life after Pomni gives him the awareness of his conditions. And if you think in terms of the power going out, it's just what life is. It all could just end any moment now, but we keep going because what else are we gonna do? Eventually we die, life pulls the plug on you, and you go out. It's unexpected and sudden a lot of the time, so you appreciate and enjoy the time you do have. A lot of people are also upset that the show doesn't follow the story of I have no mouth and I must scream. as if they were under the impression that it was ever going to be a faithful adaptation. The whole point is the show is doing a subversion of that short story. I think a lot of people thought of No Mouth as a cheat code to make their theories and figure out the story of Digital Circus before it happened. So when it didn't follow the short story, they were left disappointed and angry because the show was telling its own story and not just repeating No Mouth with cartoon characters. I Have No Mouth and I'm a Scream is an inspiration to Digital Circus in the same way the Flash Gordon serials were to Star Wars, in that they're a superficial idea and aesthetic, but the whole narrative behind the story is not all that similar, even thematically, to the material everyone thinks is the main inspiration.
What was the beginning?
I would say probably the original impetus for the whole thing was, I used to watch a serial on television called Adventure Theater, and they had Flash Gordon Conquers the Universe on it, and I used to love that.
Having discussed this with you before, I know that one thing that did catch your eye and attention were the old serials, the Saturday matinee serials that they showed on TV in those days.
Right. But those were, there was a ton of things.
Yeah.
It's one thing to notice references present in story superficial elements that point to certain inspirations. It's another to understand why those references were made so you can understand what the author was trying to convey. Like how George Lucas called the character Commander Cody, or how Stranger Things had Robert Englund play Victor Creel in Season 4.
Like Freddy Krueger's boiler room.
Freddy Krueger?
The No Mouth references in Digital Circus are just cute homages to one of the things that inspired it, and certainly not indicative of it literally being a retelling of the same story. If people really wanted to understand the inspirations behind the show, they should have kept in mind the Neon Genesis Evangelion, which Goose has said was a major influence for Digital Circus. And you can tell, not just End of Evangelion, the movie, but also the finale itself with the instrumentality and the analysis of the characters.
I don't want to die. I don't want to fade away and disappear. I don't want anyone! No one is willing to protect me. No one will be on my side! That's why I'm gonna live for myself. But I don't want to. It's so painful. I don't want to be alone.
Thematically and structurally, Evangelion is a much clearer inspiration for the show than No Mouth, which is merely a superficial inspiration for the premise of a group of characters trapped at the mercy of an AI. Aside from that, especially if you're not marginalized or if you're too young to understand the show, a lot of the representation of repressed identity and depression via avoidant attachment are probably going to go over your head, and you might find it hard to put yourself in Jax's shoes and really understand why her character is so special to a lot of people. You may dislike the direction the show went, may dislike that it's not as episodic as you assumed based on the first couple episodes, may dislike that the mysteries behind CNA and how they got into the circus are not important to the story, but to pretend these issues come from the show itself changing over time, or setting itself up poorly to the audience, is just refusing to engage with the show as it is. I'm sure a lot of the balked expectation for the finale also just comes from there being a large audience of edgy teens who would accept no less than the most nihilistic ending because they've been conditioned by postmodernism that ironically keeps sentimentality at arm's length. So anything that's hopeful and optimistic feels disingenuous because a lot of people refuse to engage with real emotions, especially with art. But the show is much more than just a sad tale of people trapped in hell, forced to suffer forever. Largely, whether you buy what the finale is doing is based on whether you think Jax is redeemable or not, which she should be. I'm willing to bet that most of the people who think she is irredeemable are kids with a simplistic black and white view of the world, where a person can do no wrong once they're an adult because they should know better, but humans are more fallible than that. Everyone, including you, the viewer, has the capacity to do bad things, and recognizing that doesn't mean excusing people who do bad things, but understanding that redemption comes from a place of getting better, which you're only allowed to do if you forgive yourself. But when people treat Jax as if she deserved to die, you're saying people who do things like Jax has are beyond living a normal life once they work on themselves. Jax isn't that bad, and her being forgiven isn't that far-fetched of an idea just because she had harmful, destructive behavior. I would bet the more mature part of the Digital Circus audience understands this, but the ones who are too young to have the life experience to understand where Goose is coming from with Jax and Kane, that think the world is black and white and not full of people who are trying to survive the hardships of life, people who fail and stumble and hurt each other, not because they're bad people, but because they're flawed, they simply wouldn't appreciate this ending.
You've been staring at a computer screen way too long, homie. Life's not that binary.
After all was said and done, after Jax does in fact abstract, you'd expect people to watch and internalize that treating Jax like that, like she wants to be treated, is feeding into the idea that doing bad things makes you irredeemable. It's fascinating how many figures from storytelling in our culture we have, where they redeem themselves by the end of the story, but Jax is somehow irredeemable. To use a relatively recent and well-known example, it's similar to how Max in Stranger Things wished her brother would die. So when he does, she feels guilty that he did, wanting herself to die now because she can't live with that guilt, the knowledge that she'd wished death on someone, her brother no less. The bad thoughts you have, the intrusive thoughts and self-destructive behaviors don't make you unforgivable, and the same applies to Jax. To reject the idea that Jax isn't too far gone is essentially to reject the whole notion of the phenomenon that was the running up the hill scene, choosing life despite that you thought you didn't deserve it. Kane committed many of the same sins Jax did, treated the circus troupe as his plaything, subjected them to all manner of cartoon violence, and even played his part in driving people to abstraction. And yet, not only are the cast able to forgive him, but so is the audience. We're introduced to Jax as an asshole, and it seems a lot of people just took that at face value and refused to let their view of her be in any way influenced or changed upon learning new information. That it isn't that simple, that there is more to her than it seemed, which, of course, is how character depth is generally achieved across the board, but I digress. Jax's abstraction is a cautionary tale for people who do bad things and believe they're too far gone. The way people talk about Jax as if she's Hitler are feeding into her own ideas of herself, that she could never get better, so why bother trying? Jax is a high school bully at worst, which may seem like the end of the world for an audience that is so young they think bullying is the worst thing someone can do, when it's not, actually, the Holocaust is. And the whole physical abuse people say she does is just because they're unwilling to engage with the show's cartoony slapstick logic. People who treat Jax as unforgivable aren't internalizing that the show is a story about someone who thinks they are unforgivable who literally commits suicide. That is the cautionary tale. Feeding into the idea that Jax is a monster is admitting you wouldn't support someone who was going through this. You wouldn't admit humans are fallible when they can improve. In the age of puritanical horseshoe woke, it's not surprising that people would side with Jax in thinking she's evil and can't be redeemed, but it is disappointing that so many people are unwilling to engage with the show and how its nuances like that, how Jax is extremely flawed, but also not too far gone, are what makes the show as good and interesting as it is.
This is clearly a very personal story to Goose. And I hadn't met Goose before we started working on this, but it was a several-year-long project, so we've gotten to know Goose quite well. And so Goose hands you a script that says, hey, here's a character that kind of represents like the worst version of myself. You know, all of this intrusive thoughts and like things about myself that I've changed, that I don't really like about myself. Here is the worst case scenario where everything goes wrong for me and what happens. And I'm like, that's messed up. That is messed up. It's a deeply personal story. And to be trusted with such a deeply personal story is very flattering, but it's sad. It's sad to read through that and be like, oh, you know, this is straight from the psyche, straight from the heart. And I was flattered. I was flattered to be able to be a part of that.
The Amazing Digital Circus is extremely personal to Gooseworx, and you can tell from how vulnerable the writing is. It's not a clean, safe, satisfying ending to the theory-obsessed shipper fans of the show. It's an ending that is clear from the start of the show if you're willing to engage with it on its own terms and not MatPat's. As I explained in my first video about the show, it isn't some lore-bait Five Nights at Freddy's-esque schlock, but a straightforward character drama. If you're watching this video, I'd hope you're willing to engage with the show on its own terms, understanding for one, the cartoon violence we see is not meant to be taken seriously. Jax throwing Ragatha in the fryer isn't like she's throwing her in a literal fryer. It's just cartoony, exaggerated violence from an animated, cartoony show. It's like trying to cancel Tom for fucking with Jerry. I was emotional throughout most of the finale, but the moment that got me to cry, as silly as it may sound, is when the Moon, voiced by Gooseworx herself, tells Kane she loves him, and he says,
"You know, I never programmed you to say you loved me."
I know.
Goose once said that Jax and Kane are modeled after her own character flaws, Gooseworx, voicing the Moon, saying that it may take time, but the other characters will forgive Kane, that she loves him despite not having to, showing she forgives herself, understanding that part of our identity, and how he may have hurt people before, and how it's valid to know it was a bad thing she did, but it is still a part of her.
You have to choose to love yourself, even if it doesn't make sense. It's not natural, it's intentional.
That counterbalanced with Jax, who thinks she is beyond forgiveness.
You're all the same, you screaming kids, you know that? Look at me, I'm unforgivable. Well, here's the unforeseeable. I forgive you.
Who thinks she can't be loved, being shown that love by Pomni in her last moments.
You're not unlovable. You're not unlovable!
I really do love how there's a parallel between Kane being loved by the moon, even if he didn't program her to love him, and Jax being loved by Pomni, which goes against her entire view of self, that she feels she can't and doesn't deserve to be loved. The thing that a lot of people don't realize, and why they seem so against the idea that Jax abstracted, is that while Jax could have gotten better, she wouldn't allow herself to. The other characters already forgave her at the start of episode 8. They even forgive Kane at the end of episode 9, but Jax wouldn't forgive herself.
You're not supposed to care. You're not supposed to miss me. You're not supposed to love me.
People may want to blame Pomni for not talking to her, but ultimately, nobody could have prevented it other than Jax, and she refused to accept any help. The only person who defines who is irredeemable is themselves, and Jax decided she was irredeemable. You can't force someone to be saved if they don't want to be saved.
Relationships are two-sided, and sometimes it doesn't make sense to do all the heavy lifting when the other isn't in the mood.
And what's especially tragic is that after she abstracts, she regrets it.
I don't want to go.
Those words often carry such heavy meaning.
I don't want to go.
The idea of your time being cut short and not achieving your potential is sad enough, but for Jax, who did this to herself, as we often see people who commit suicide regretting it in their last moments, it hits so hard. Jax refused to open up her entire time with Pomni, but after she died, she finally does. And the part she was so scared of being judged or tossed aside by Pomni once she saw the real Jax, just didn't happen. Pomni still loves Jax. And the part that hurts so much is thinking they could have done more. Pomni and Ragatha especially feel responsible, as anyone would if their friend killed themselves. And the abruptness of the abstraction just works for that. A lot of people don't like that Jax abstracted off screen and don't like how abrupt it is, but that is the point. It's sudden and not a huge operatic moment like in a Shakespeare play. One moment they're there, the next your friend is gone, and you spend the rest of your life wishing you'd done more. It's tragic and heartbreaking, and it's why it works so well. And it was always coming to this, despite what some Twitter users would have you believe. And, despite what some Twitter users would have you believe, it's an absolutely masterful depiction of succumbing to suicide, depression, self-hatred. It's a beautiful tragedy. A cautionary tale from which people will hopefully learn not to be like Jax, not to close yourself off from people and push them away, that you're not too far gone, irredeemable, or unable to be loved. And of course, not to kill yourself, because in an absolute masterstroke, even she regrets it. It's devastating, but it's real, and that's where some people seem to be getting caught up. I know a lot of people don't like it when depressive and suicidal characters die at the end of stories, and I fully understand why, with characters like Elle from Stranger Things, for example, where it undermines the themes of the story and her character growth to become more than a weapon and actually become a full person. But this isn't that. That's not how the real world works, how life works, how people work. You know, the thing that art like this is trying to depict as honestly as possible. And it's certainly not the message that Goose is putting out there with Digital Circus. In fact, Goose has time and time again shown that Jax has had the opportunities to improve, and people around her who, despite everything, only want the best for her. And that point is driven home in the finale by having a regretful Kane figure his way back out of the void and seek redemption. He's a counterpoint to Jax in that way. This is the happy ending that Jax could have had if she just internalized that she's not a monster, and any of the lessons that the people around her have been trying to impart on her throughout her time in the circus. If she took the hands that were held out to her instead of swatting them away. It wasn't the story saying Jax was beyond forgiveness, it was Jax saying that. Especially as a story of Jax being a repressed trans woman, as is basically confirmed in the finale, you see how that can be a very touching and personal story of how dysphoria and the expectations from society cause a burden on trans people that many find too hard to carry, thus being unable to do it ultimately. Truth is that some trans people do find it too hard to live repressing their identity their whole lives, and commit suicide. And it's not Goose's job to pretend that's not true for the sake of the audience feeling better, or pretending that being queer is always about happy sunshine and rainbows. I also understand people who are trying to find some comfort in saying they'll be able to undo abstractions, but I feel that misses the entire point of what abstractions are, which is a death, more specifically suicide. Basically, their mind files get corrupted. I know we don't want these characters, especially Jax, to be gone, but for the narrative, for the idea that Jax committed suicide and regretted it, the idea that it was so sudden to everyone else, it works perfectly. I see the tent for Jax being a way to put her to rest, instead of abandoning her and try to forget her like Cain did before, with the other abstractions which were put in the cellar. They're putting her to rest in a calm place, where the remnants of her mind won't be in pain anymore. Not to toot my own horn, but I did say Jax was trans, and it wouldn't be made explicit by them saying the word trans in the finale, which is exactly what happened. Her scene with Ribbit, talking about how her dad made her feel like less of a man, always berating her, then her mom taking out her resentment towards Jax's dad on Jax, making her feel like too much of a man and not enough. Then Jax telling her mom something personal, to get her to shut up about comparing Jax to her dad, then her mom using it against her to keep abusing her, obviously the something personal being that she thinks she's trans, and then with Ribbit putting the bow on Jax and saying,
"Your secret's safe with me."
As well as Isn't She Lovely playing when Pomni and Jax hug, being a song about the birth of a baby girl. It just all tells you way more than needed about Jax being actually trans. My previous video said that Jax being trans not being confirmed wouldn't be a problem, but this is confirmation. All that could be done to make it clearer is for her to utter the words, "I am trans." It is implied in the same way it is implied that Will is gay and Robin is a lesbian in Stranger Things, despite that they never explicitly say those words. The way I like to see the "Isn't She Lovely" moment is that it's Jax's own mind thinking with that song. Jax finally allows herself to be who she is for the first time in her life, letting Pomni see her, letting herself be born before she unfortunately disappears. The detractors have been trying to come up with hilarious ideas of why those scenes don't actually mean Jax is trans, like saying the bow from Ribbit is just a sign of affection, or that the "Isn't She Lovely" song is about Pomni, or that Jax's body wasn't a girl's body, and Cain said,
"I made a program that creates a body perfectly encapsulating their mind files."
And it's quite funny to see. If it was just affection from Ribbit, Goose could have had her show it in many ways that wouldn't have had the implication, but she chose that specific way because she knows full well the connotations, being trans herself. The song, "Isn't She Lovely," is about a newborn girl, not about a grown woman who is wonderful. And not only is Jax's body extremely genderless anyway, people say the thing about the bodies and mind files is if the other characters all love their bodies, when in fact, it has been shown that especially Genga and Zubo don't like their bodies, so why would we assume that Cain made their bodies with their best interests at heart, and not in fact the whole point of his character, which is that he thinks he's doing what's best for the characters, but is in fact looking out for himself and his own ego.
"I made a program that creates a body perfectly encapsulating their mind files, and they hate those too!"
Even in the real world, Jax lets her hair grow and goes to Zubo's bar, which is described as a place where people can go to not be judged for who they are. Even in the news article, Cain shows them being described as a space first and foremost for local queer communities to be who they are. Jax hasn't transitioned fully yet, but she will. She's accepting herself. Her previous experience coming out was her mom abusing her verbally. I think she's taking it slow. It's fascinating how people are unwilling to see Jax as trans when the text is quite clear about it. There are even things I didn't mention in my previous video that aid my point, like the chicken egg line.
"I'm just a misunderstood little chicken fetus in an egg that needs to be cracked open."
Which is clear trans lingo about being in the closet, which, again, is a connotation that Goose will know full well, and so know what they're implying. Or Jax's room being girly, which further emphasized the point that she is clearly trans. Lots of people also said Jax is bad representation because she's a bad person, which I find so reductive. We don't need only good people to represent us queer people. Messy characters like Jax are also very important to understand the darker sides of ourselves, which is something straight people get all the time, so why not us? There's this sense that minorities represent a community, whereas cis-het white men are unique cases, like with this comic. So everyone, including queer people, want the queer characters to be perfect.
I'm not a joke anymore. I'm strictly transgender. I'm not all this other stuff. I represent the transgender community, and it's a real thing. I am not crazy, but I do have flaws.
Because anything else would mean you're saying all queer people are like that, when in fact we're all unique, and we are allowed to suck and be bad people too. And Jax isn't bad representation just because she's a bad person or a bully. She is good representation because her self-hatred and internalized repression of her identity, affected mainly by toxic masculinity, are extremely well written in regards to how the real trans experience works. And it shows what not confronting those feelings and letting them consume you can do to your mental health. So, in conclusion, the Amazing Digital Circus is really amazing. And if you disagree, you're wrong. No, obviously not everything is going to be to everyone's taste. However, that isn't the show's fault. There's a difference between this isn't for me and this is bad, or this isn't how I wanted things to go and this is poorly written. There's a world of difference between Digital Circus and something like Stranger Things, which did actually fumble the ending. The Amazing Digital Circus is a cautionary tale against making a show too accessible, exposing raw and complex characters to the general public by making a bright and colorful animated show. You should engage with a piece of media, a piece of art, on its own terms, for what it actually is, or you might as well not engage with it at all. If you are someone who didn't let the show be what it wanted to be, now that the finale is out and the show is over, I just want to encourage you to, and hope that you will, look back on the show, maybe rewatch it, and take it for what it is, rather than what you're expecting or think it ought to be. Or at least that you learn a little something about how to engage with media. The Amazing Digital Circus is Goose's baby, Goose's art, her self-expression. It's a personal and moving story, a light in the dark for those who think they're too far gone. Engaging with it for what it is the least you should do. Otherwise, you're really missing out.